welcome again to the Descent and Rising Book Club with myself and Carly Mountain. Really excited about diving into this. It's also happy birthday to Descent and Rising, which is 1 this month. So very exciting. This book has been beloved by huge amounts of women. It's got a very, very loyal and devoted following to it. Lots of women have been in contact with us, and I know with Carly too, to tell us how life-changing it has been and how much it has given them language to experiences that they weren't previously able to articulate, verbalize, conceptualize. So I'm really delighted that we're going to get to dive into this together. Turn off that light because that's blinding me. So, Carly, welcome. I'd love you to just let us know kind of, where did this book start? Where did you first discover the Inanna myth, and how did you discover that it was something that was applicable not only to your own life, but to the lives of women that you worked with?
So I first discovered it in a book that was written by a woman called Linda Hartley. And she wrote a wonderful book called Servants of the Sacred Dream. And the story is part of that book. And I remember just reading it and thinking, that's my life. How is that possible that this myth is just telling me the structure of what's been happening in my life? And I couldn't believe it. It was a real moment of, and I think I say it in the book, it kind of consecrated the journey I had been walking, but didn't have a map for. And I just thought, wow, why has no one told me this story? Why isn't it one of the stories we're told as children or young adults? And so I thought, well, if that's the case for me, then it's bound to be helpful for others. And it kind of went on from there. And at the time I was holding women's circles, and I'd been foraging for, I had been doing yoga practices for a long time, but the yoga was bringing up huge amounts of stuff from the underworld of my being and my body. And then there was nowhere inside of those yoga spaces to process that. And I would have to then go away and process it alone, or eventually I got a therapist to process it with. And I thought there has to be some way of bringing these worlds together, bringing the yoga practices together, along with the emotional processing, along with the depth. And the Inanna myth seemed like the final piece of that puzzle, really. And so I then worked towards holding the myth as the third year of the course that I was then holding for the women that I was working with.
So a question immediately comes to me from what you've just said. Why do you think it is that we don't teach this to our children? You know, along at the time where we teach them Greek myths and fairy tales, why is this not a myth that we are sharing with our children?
It's amazing, isn't it? It's an amazing thing. And I think it is to do with the buried goddess. I really feel that it is something that has been buried inside of our own psyches and the collective psyche. And those bigger dragon slaying sort of hero myths that are most popularized seem to be the ones that get taught again and again and again. And it's almost like this. Well, I mean, we know, don't we, that say the Gnostic Gospels, the Magdalene Gospels, they were intentionally buried. An intention part, and the first part was intentionally destroyed. And I feel like this is part of that lineage that was also buried and destroyed, and intentionally, I think it has been intentionally hidden from us. But I also think there's a sort of amnesia now where we kind of think that dominator patriarchal systems are the way that it's always been and there's no other option. Whereas obviously that's really not the truth. And I think that women, and I've been hearing in the last week, I've heard from 5 men about this book. And they're going, oh, I love this work. You know, I bought this for my wife, but I'm reading it because she's not got to it yet. And I'm just loving it. And so I think our souls, you know, whatever gender we are, sing with it when it really resonates in our lives. So yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And yeah, it's changed. I think
I first came across it in the work of Pam England and Birthing from Within, and she discussed it in terms of the birthing journey. And I thought that was a very brave and powerful thing to do in terms of, giving birth is about life. And yet she is kind of speaking of this need to kind of descend, and this need to kind of, sacrifice ourselves and really release and surrender in order to be able to give birth. And I thought that was a very powerful thing. And then there was a film, and I should have found her name. She's an independent women's filmmaker, director, and she wrote this whole modern version of The Inanimate. And then she had this actual performance of it with a group of women. And it was just so, so powerful. But so what seeing it rather than reading it really brought home to me was just the visceral violence, the real despair that you have to get to. That, the hanging on the meat hook is just such a visceral image.
Mm.
And maybe that is also why we don't teach it in schools, because it is like, it's hardcore, that image.
Yeah. And Kerry's just saying on the chat, maybe it's also because it's not a European myth. And I do think it's so interesting as well, isn't it, that this is born out of what is now Iraq. And it's so ironic that that's where all the wars are raging, and that this goddess, this deep rootedness in goddess culture is so part of that land.
And I love that you have the voice of an Iraqi woman in there. I just think that is so powerful, because we're always trying to get a diverse range of voices into our Womancraft books, and just to have the voice of a woman who was dealing with the contemporary issues of Iraq at the same time as discovering this ancient past that is hers by blood lineage, is her story.
Yeah. I had been looking, I really wanted to speak to an Iraqi woman. I was really finding it hard. She was the last woman I spoke to. And I was so grateful to find her. And I think I was sort of looking for a blessing in a way, because I was really aware that I was working with this story that's not from our land and how oppressed women are. And obviously I'm a white woman, and that kind of relationship with, cultural appropriation and all of that. And she said to me so clearly, she said, I am just so grateful when anyone brings the name Inanna to their lips. For her, it was bringing it to life, bringing it to others' awareness. And she said, I'm just so glad that you're doing it. Lovely. But when I recorded the audiobook, it was actually Tamara's story that my voice kept cracking, because I just was moved to tears more than once in that chapter. And it was really good, because I worked with such a sensitive woman for the audiobook, and she didn't stop me. And I did pause to kind of compose myself, but I also didn't take the emotion completely out of my voice. And I don't know if anyone's listened to it and can hear the emotion in my voice. Kerry's putting a thumbs up. I really didn't want to be a BBC. I love the BBC, but I didn't want to be a BBC reporter, like very official reader of the book. I really wanted that the emotion, when it rose, that it was still allowed in my voice, but without it becoming distracting. So that was a really fine line that I played with as we recorded the audiobook. And I found, with the war that's going on at the moment, reading Tamara's story just really very raw in my system, reading that out loud. I can still feel it now, actually talking about it.
I had the same when I was doing the audiobook for Burning Woman, and there were a couple of points where I was in tears, and again I decided to keep that in because it's part of the journey of the book. You're not trying to make your listener cry, but at the same time it's an emotional bit, and to read it in an emotionalist way feels wrong somehow. And that is why we're absolutely insistent that all of our audiobooks are read by the author, because you want to hear that emotion, you want to have that deep connection to the material, rather than just somebody who's being paid to do a job and read content.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's a deeply feminine way of doing it. I love that you allowed that too. And, why shouldn't we show the emotion we feel? I find it so bizarre when news reporters go, oh, yes, and today, 10,000 people were killed, and they're just saying it as if nothing, what are we dissociating from in that moment? And I know your books and my book is certainly about not dissociating anymore from any part of our experience as much as is possible for our system in that moment. So yeah, to embody that in both the writing and the delivery of the book in all ways is definitely been my intention. Yeah.
And so a question leading on from that is, you asked many women to share their stories as part of the book. And that's a tricky thing to do, to ask people to be really vulnerable and sharing some really dark, tricky times in their lives. How was that? Both the approaching people, the getting of the stories, and ensuring the safety of the women who shared. Would you be able to share a little bit about that?
Sure. So because I hadn't done anything like this before, where I mean, obviously I'm a therapist and a space holder, so I'm really used to holding confidential spaces. It was quite an edge for me to record. I remember asking to record was a bit of an edge, and then being really clear in communication about that. And I did give every woman the opportunity to, once they read how I'd placed it in the book in context, I really did give them all the opportunity to either withdraw their material completely or be it anonymized and choose the, and actually it was you that said, ask them if they're going to anonymize it, ask them to choose the name, because it's an avatar they're sending out of themselves. And I thought that was so beautiful. That was really helpful piece of insight and that you suggested there. So yeah, I think making the container, just like with all sacred spaces, was really important, and being very clear about what I was asking and the fact that they still had control over their story. And I think because of that contract, as far as I know, all the women were very happy with it. One woman chose to withdraw, and that was absolutely fine. It actually was a gift in a way, because something else then emerged. And it was interesting choosing who to approach. But what I found really interesting was there were certain key people who were in my kind of cosmos, as it were. And I was like, the work they're doing, they've descended in order to do that. Oh, I think they've descended in order to do that work. Oh, they've definitely descended in order to do that work. And you being one of them, obviously, I was like, oh, she's definitely lived this myth. I wonder if Lucy had talked to me.
So how did you know? What are the tells? I'm really curious. The slightly crazy look in the eye.
I think it's people doing unique work very authentically, in a way that is naked and yet there's a nakedness and yet a directness. Do you know, there's some kind of naked that's like really overly exposed that happens a lot in our world these days. And I think sometimes that's where the internet can be a very dangerous place to be when you're descending and you haven't yet risen. But actually, yeah, there's something about the robustness, even with vulnerability, of people offering certain work that just helped me go, oh, you don't get that robustness for free. And that's not to say there isn't vulnerability there, but it's something about learning to hold those two and somehow working and offering work through that. There's a sense, I just think you can feel it. It's a beautiful thing, actually.
So I'd love to share with people that when you approached me, you approached me to take part in the book. It was only after you had interviewed me, I'd heard more about the book, that I said to you, this is something that I would love you to submit to Womancraft. So it very much was, you were reaching out to me, not for Womancraft, but to me. But I could see in your book that this was a Womancraft book, and that you were holding the space so beautifully, making it feel safe to go there, and that it was very deep work that was done both intellectually rigorously, but also with soul and with feeling and a deep honoring of the feminine, which I just always excites me. That ticks all my boxes.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I feel like there was a real resonance between us, and I was very grateful to spend that time with you. And you never know when you reach out to people how it's going to go, so But yeah, I was very fortunate that I just felt so honored that women really did. And women seem to want to share the stories. You know, I had a couple of people turn me down that I approached, which I was absolutely fine for, because I'm like, great, I'm glad you could say no. So yeah, I think the women who said yes actually really wanted to share their story, and there was medicine hopefully for them in it. It seemed to be the case. It seemed like there was an exchange going on that was important. So
And
yeah.
were you aware, like, do you feel like most of the women who told you the story had processed it through therapy, talked it through with friends and partners, or did you feel like for some of the women it was their first real telling, or the first threading together of all the pieces?
Yes. So a couple of women that I told, because as part of the call, I told the myth, if for the people that, because some people I approached didn't know the myth. And so I remember one woman in particular, when I shared the myth with her, she was just like, she was completely blown away by it. She was just like, I can't believe I didn't know this story and how much it resonates with me. So again, there was this synchronicity in that I'd witnessed something in her, and then there was a gift given from my side, and then she gifted me her story. So that happened at least once. I can't remember it happening with anyone else, but yeah, she hadn't worked with the myth or even heard it before, and it really resonated with her.
Well, you see, for me, I had heard the myth of the descent, but I hadn't heard about anything that came afterwards. So for me, the whole thing of the sky gods was a complete revelation, because that's what I was very much dealing with and had been dealing with, was trying to get somebody to help us in the situation we were in, appealing to all the authorities, and no one would help us. And when you then were able to name that, I was like, oh my God, that's part of it too. And then realizing that I had got stuck in that descent bit, I got stuck in trying to come out of it and not being able to, and in a kind of an arrested rising. And so for me, the process of editing the book was horrific because I was having to live it at the same time as editing it. And every time I would go back to it, I'd like, oh God, I've got to go there again. I've got to deal with this again. I've got to process this again. And so that was when my migraines really started kicking off. And it was just like this thing of knowing I needed to, because I had a contract with you, because I wanted to get through it and get the work done. But it was this thing of having to show up with this heavy, deep material and really be present with it, be present with every single word, every full stop, every comma. No racing over, no turning the page, no skipping a chapter. I had to be there. So it was medicine for me, for sure.
Yeah, and well, I mean, you did. It was so beautiful to have you as, I think I say in the acknowledgements that you were definitely the Ninshaba of the book, and some of your edits were just so synchronistic. One of the best ones, and I think I've said this to a few people now, was when you said, "What is the breastplate?" And that just brought that chapter into shape. And the heart chapter was one of the hardest ones for me to write, and it's one of the ones that I'm most pleased with how it came together. And that question just really helped me bring clarity to the parts that hadn't quite revealed themselves yet. So
I love working in an editing relationship when people do take that and just run with it, and they're just like, rather than being precious about what is, they kind of see what might be missing and what could be, and they just go whoomp with it. And it's so exciting to see. Tell me, so you have lots of other women's stories in, but your story is kind of dealt with lightly, can I say?
Yes.
What was your decision around that, bearing in mind you're a therapist, and bearing in mind that, you know, a book makes you very kind of public and vulnerable? How did you decide what to include, what to allude to, and what to omit?
What a great question that no one has asked me, but I've done a lot of podcasts. There was more of my story in there, as you know, and I sat with that and I grappled with it because I wasn't sure. And at the last minute, I took out chunks, and the reason for that was that I felt as a space, I felt my role in the book was to be a space holder of the book. And as anyone who's a therapist knows on this call, you only self-disclose if self-disclosure is absolutely in service of the work that's being done. You don't self-disclose for your own medicine. You do that in supervision or in your own therapy. So I didn't want this book to become my therapy. I mean, it has been my therapy. It is my medicine, but that's not the primary goal because that's just self-indulgent. And it's not actually being true in my feeling to the work, not certainly in the way I want to work anyway. And so I felt that in the bits of my story that are held lightly in the book were absolutely a teaching point, and that's why they're there. And the other parts of my story that weren't fully in service to the book had to go. And actually, it just came to be that there was to be less of me in there than I originally thought there would be. And it feels really right that that's the case. Because yeah, for all those reasons, I really feel like I was there to hold the space of the book and the myth, and only the parts that are a teaching point are in there. Felt much cleaner that way, and it felt like I could really hold the space for the book better.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel like I'm going to move on to a little bit of reading because we've done a lot of talking. I'd like to share a few of your words.
That'd be great.
Entering the dark. When I descended, I learned that there was another story of my life. Not the one that I knew, but the understory that had been playing beneath what I thought I knew about who I was. In this understory lived the shadow stream, the current that pulled the waves on the surface of my life. Wounding, desire, rage, longing, vitality, strength, and the roots of my misguided ideas and ideals lived there. The heroine's path I walked to my own underworld was led by love and desire, but it landed me in grief, complexity, and painful awakening. An awakening that I am utterly grateful for. What I was subconsciously searching for was the red thread of my feminine lineage, but it was buried and entangled. Only through digging in the dark could it be uncovered. I was looking for another way, and through the search, I became the unwitting heroine of my mythology. So that red thread is an image that comes up a lot in women's writing. What does the red thread mean to you?
The red thread, I think, means to me, it's the sacred connection to the sacred feminine. And I love that it's red because I love that so connects to our blood. And I love that the women's wombs know how to synchronize, and the magic of that, and how we're connected to moons and tidalness and seasons and waxing and waning and that life, death, life cycle. And so it makes perfect sense to me that it's the red thread, but also the red of heart. In Taoist philosophy, it's said that the heart center is the main hub of the sexual energy of the body in women. And there's something very heartful about the red thread, I think. And again, I find it really interesting because I first came across the red thread through the Japanese story of the red thread attached to the little finger between lovers. And again, I find that really fascinating. I find it quite beautiful. But again, for me, then it attached it to a man in my head. And I was then really amazed to discover this idea of red thread as the lineage of the feminine. And again, the kind of later discovery of that kind of mirrors what happened in my descent as well, that there was this sort of, like what Maureen Murdoch speaks to in The Heroine's Journey, where she says at first you have to you deal with the father wound first and then reach the mother wound. And that was very much how it was for me. My father wound was kind of more visible because we're living in the cult of the father, essentially. And I had to really then drop into the descent to get to that red thread and really understand it in an embodied way. So yeah, for me, it's very much an embodied red thread as well as the sacred red thread that's as old as time somehow.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then looking at, because that chapter was about entering the dark, without kind of trying to get you to sum up the first half of the book, what are signals that we could look out for to know that we are entering the dark?
I think a lot of death, a lot of being stripped, a lot of things being taken or coming to an end, a lot of disruption of who we think we are, or the relationships we're having, or the things that we've known. And often I find, and this is what the women who shared their stories with me have said, and lots of people who've then emailed me have said, that it's not just one thing going, it's multiple things at once. It's that earthquake analogy of that there's an epicenter and then it's ricocheting all the way out. So I feel like, I think I say something in the book, like you might think you're stuck in a series of very difficult changes. And when that's happening, that for me is a signal that you're in the descent.
Okay, so weird question now, but I'm going to go there. Do you think that we, our soul, some force outside ourselves, makes those things happen in order for us to change? Or do we change because those things happen?
Oh, that's a big one, Lucy.
You're able for it.
Am I? That's just kind of blown my mind. How can I answer that? That's the mystery, is it not?
Yeah.
If I could,
know, but do you have a take on what you think? Do you think that there is some predestined kind of thing that happens, or is it just that we, because all the shit has hit the fan, we then have to respond and change?
So I feel like I'm speaking for myself and people that come to work with me. The embodied subconscious is a really powerful thing. And I feel like it will bring up your stuff as many times as it has to until you look at it, or you don't, and you die having not looked at it, which many people do. So I feel like those tectonic plates that move inside of us and our lives are going to move whether we like it or not. And then there's the choice, isn't it? I think that is where this myth is so clear, that Inanna chooses to descend, to go towards the things that are paining her. She doesn't choose to ignore it anymore. So I guess the changes that are happening are the call. They are Erish Kagal going, hello, I'm here. Are you going to meet me? And at which point we have a choice. And if we choose not to, the things will keep happening. I don't know anyone for whom that isn't the case. It's that repeat, that Jan Zwicky poem, the patterns of our lives repeat themselves until we listen. Forgive this. Say now what you need to say. And that just makes me go every time, because it's like I've got goosebumps all the way to my head, that poem. And the beginning of it, in the middle of it, because it's, in fact, I might just speak the whole poem because I think it really speaks to this. And she doesn't like to have her poem shared, so I couldn't include it in the book. But it starts by saying, I'm not going to be able to remember it now. Once again, the moment of impossible transition, the bow, its silent voice hovering above the string. Let's say the story of your life goes like this. Let's say you could start anywhere. Let's say you took your splintered being by the hand and led it to the center of a room, starlight through the floorboards of the soul. The patterns of our lives repeat themselves until we listen. Forgive this. Say now what you need to say. I feel like that taking your splintered being by the hand and leading it into the center of the room is the descent. And it takes a lot of courage, but it's not impossible.
Would you mind telling us who that poem was by, just for people might be
Absolutely. It's by Jan Zwicky. There's a little excerpt of it in the book, and it's called The Art of Fugue. I think it's part 4, and it's from she has a chapbook, a poetry, small collection of poems, and I can't remember the name of them now, but if you Google Jan Zwicky and you look that up, I don't think you can get the book anymore, sadly, but it is her poetry is beautiful.
Thank you. You've made me want to go off and learn poems now. It's been years since I've learned poems. And I find myself often standing on the shore, wanting to do the She of the Sea blessing to share with people. And I'm like, I can remember the first bit, I can remember the last bit, but I can't remember the middle. And that's a poem that I wrote.
Yeah. And it's amazing, isn't it, how you don't just know your own poems, you have to get to learn their anatomy just like anything else. And I love that.
This feels like a good time. You were going to share one of your poems. Now, I'm aware that I've like totally turned it on its head, and you were going to do that at the end of things. But would it be good to share that now, or would you prefer to share the other piece?
Yeah, we could share it now. I'm quite happy with that.
I just feel like we're in the kind of the poetry vibe.
Yeah, and I don't know it by heart still. I almost do, but I'm just gonna. It's funny because my teacher, Kim Rosen, she does a whole thing in her book about the gift of forgetting. And I did a lot of work with her on this. I've worked with her for years now. And she says how the parts of the poems that we forget have the most medicine for us, and they're the parts that are not integrated inside of us yet. And so what she does when we're reciting poems or speaking poems she says, let yourself forget. And the amount of times I've sat in a circle with her and just lost the thread in the middle and then waited to see what emerges. And it's just such a medicinal process. So yeah, she speaks about it in her book, Saved by a Poem, The Gift of Forgetting. And I love that. And I love that in terms of the descent, this idea of the things that we've forgotten that we have to remember along the way really speaks to the way that she encourages people to embody that process of forgetting poems or forgetting words. It's really fascinating to me. So yes, right. I'm just trying to find that poem. I'm actually on holiday with my husband for 2 days, and so I forgot to bring a live copy of the book. So I've got the digital.
Madly scrolling.
And I'm madly scrolling. I've got it now. Yes. So this is the poem, the last bit of the book, Descent and Rising. The dark cocoon of heartbreak is vital ground. Through that devastated shipwreck appear the wings of spirit, the second birth canal, whose rivers deliver us back to the heart of it all. In the ruthless light of day, one bridge burns, and we are no longer our father's daughters. The stretcher we wake up on carries us through the thickets of soul towards a new beyond. Heartbreak for one becomes a grieving for the whole world. Our embryonic heartbeats compel us to build new bridges that hum to the song. We remember, and our footsteps touch the ground tenderly in their authority. The bridge to the goddess is built through a sincere heart, and no heart is more sincere than that of the unwitting warrior who has found her yes, who cannot possibly remain folded. That one who, through being broken in two, is delivered back into one with everything. Yeah. I love that poem. And I sat down at my kitchen table one lunchtime and wrote that poem in about 5 minutes, maybe 10. It came out fully formed. Initially, it said the bridge to God, so I changed it to goddess. Other than that, I've changed nothing about it. And it's one of those things where it just came through from somewhere. It was almost like I was just the writer, but I wasn't, and I just find that really amazing. It's only happened to me twice with poems, but I just absolutely love it when it happens. It's like you've just tapped into some sort of creative stream. And then I read Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic. And she tells the story of a woman, a poet, who would hear poems coming towards her when she was out working in the fields, and would run back to the house because she said they'd go through her body, and if she could write, she would write them fully formed. But if she didn't get there in time, they'd move through and move on to find.
That's what happened to me.
And then she says that sometimes she would get into the house just as it was coming out the back of her, and she could write it down backwards on the page and catch it just as it was leaving.
That doesn't happen to me.
It never happened to me either, but I was like, that's such an amazing story. So I can't remember which writer it is, but it just delighted me, this idea that there's poems moving or ideas for books moving in the ether, and they come and they visit you, and they might be yours to tell, or if you don't pay attention to them or give them your time, they may move to go and visit someone else. And I love this idea that there's this stream of consciousness or creativity that's moving all the time, the creatrix. It's just so magic to me. I love it.
Oh, me too. For me, they come in, and then the line goes on loop until I write it down. And I've got, a few minutes, and if I can memorize it, then the next one comes in. And if I can't, and I can't write it down, then good luck to me ever being able to access that again. So like when I'm driving along in the car, I'll regularly say to a child next to me, grab some paper, write this down, because it has to go down, otherwise it's gone. And like at night, if I'm trying to go to sleep and the flow is coming through me, and I'd be like, okay, just this line, and then I'm going to sleep. Okay, just this line, and then I'm going to sleep. And I'll be there, and I'm eventually like, I have to sleep. You've given me enough. I'll try and remember the rest for the morning, but, human here.
I love this. And, it so resonates. My daughter, one of my daughters, she comes downstairs regularly at the moment with just writing, like she's tattooed all of her hands because she just has to write things down as she's going to sleep on her hands. So she remembers them for the next day, and she's super creative. It's lovely.
Yeah, I've got the image for one of my e-courses, Your Authentic Voice, is literally that is my hand that I'd done the night before because I couldn't turn on the lights again. I didn't have any more paper. I was like, okay, it's going on the skin. Anyway, I'd love to take this opportunity now to invite questions from anybody who would like to ask Carly anything. If you'd like to unmute yourself, and we'll do first come, first served. Carrie.
I put one in the chat.
Oh, that was very organised.
Well, it's okay. I can say it's very short. For me, it feels like when you describe the tells of the descent, that's where I am. Mm. But I also feel like I'm rising, and I wanted to know what you think about how it sometimes feels like it's almost simultaneous.
Yeah.
And it's what's happening with me is that my father's dying, so there's a limited amount of time to complete whatever story we're completing on this descent path and rising path while he's still embodied. And so it feels like there's a very fast thing happening. I just wondered if that was something that I don't know what I'm asking, really. Is that something you're familiar with, or does it more often go on a slower cycle?
I think it varies, and I think it's the same with I think what's so interesting, and this is what was really difficult about writing the rising part of the book, is the fact that it isn't linear. And this spiral idea I find really helpful in this, in the sense of the way that we can be spiraling in all sorts of different directions at once, or maybe two spirals moving simultaneously is what I'm thinking as I'm hearing you speak. It's almost like I can feel two spirals happening at once. And what's interesting, what I found in the structure of writing Rising, was how there were echoes of the descent echoing back through the rising, as if you have to re-walk some of your own footsteps twice in the rising. And there's what I call the second wave of grief in that one of the sacrificing parts is like another grief, and it can feel like you're back in the descent, but actually I think you're in the sacrifice part of rising. And sometimes we mistake that and get confused. So I feel like there's echoes of the descent all the way through rising.
Thank you.
If that's, yeah. So,
Can
yeah.
I say
How
a
can
little
we
bit
tell,
more?
Carly? How can we tell? How can we differentiate between the two?
Possibly only with hindsight. However, interestingly, and I love the way that the mystery weaves in this, because this was part of the book I was going to read instead of the poem, was about sacrifice. And so for me, one of my things on my descent was that I was stripped of a relationship with a teacher and somebody who I loved dearly. And as I rose, the final part of my rising, which has happened after the book's been published, is that I've also ended voluntarily 2 relationships with key teachers and space holders for me. So again, there's been this mirror that's happened. The difference for me in this one going down was that it felt like it being torn away. It was like a choiceless choice. It was exceptionally painful. The one coming up was more of a, not that there wasn't grief there, but there's an authority in me and a decision maker in me that was not mature enough in the first experience to fully own the sacrifice. And there was something about rising and making the sacrifice where there was something in me that's come to maturity that's been able to go, I know that these relationships need to end because it's time. And it felt much different, the decision was made from a much different place inside of myself. But I don't think I could have done that if I hadn't had the first unequivocal stripping one. So that's just an example for me of an echo that's happened in rising. And I think that sacrifice is somehow something in that part of the book. It says something like, we're now able to take responsibility for our parts. And it's this sense of, yeah, somehow robust is the word coming in again, this ability to be with what is in a different kind of way. But yeah, you're going to say something, Kerry, go for it.
Well, I just wanted to give an illustration of exactly what you're saying from what's happening with my dad. So I had a really difficult childhood with my father. He was abusive, and I completely forgot it all and then recovered memories, and he denied it. And now he's dying, and he's in a care home, and he's got vascular dementia, and he's fragmenting. And I chose consciously to walk the path of, how can I care for someone who's hurt me? Now, he's not hurting me now, past, but can I care for him? And being able to has brought such joy. It's like some of the things that I didn't get as a child, I'm getting now. And that then brings the loss again.
Yeah.
Like, I get this moment of amazing grace with him because there's no choice but to be in the present. But then it goes back down into the, oh, but I did, so much that I missed out on and didn't have because of the trauma, and because I cut off from him completely for 6 years and missed out on an awful lot. And then to be getting it now. Yeah. And then sometimes he does something, not intentionally, just from going on in his head, and I have to leave. I can't be with it. But now, instead of just running off, I say, I'm sorry, Dad, I'm just upset at the moment. I'm going to go for a little walk, but I will come back. And that feels like that responsible.
Yes.
I'm not just abandoning him when he's distressed and he's pouring out his distress in a way that's I can't handle.
But you're also not abandoning yourself, and that's the key bit.
Yeah.
You're not sacrificing yourself for him and what he would think and what he needs. You're saying, actually, this is what I need. I will be back. And you're really honoring your needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, because it's that is, I think it's also about bringing in, so the sacrifice in the myth is Dumuzi, which is that elevated masculine that cannot come off the throne to meet us. And so how do we embody a different form of structure of the masculine inside of us, a compassionate masculine inside of us. And it sounds like what you're holding is the final part of rising, which is compassion for self and other in the way you're caring for your father, which does help us to rise. So it's just amazing, isn't it, how the myth maps these pieces and then we live through them. And it's just a phenomenal thing, I think.
But also how he's fallen off his throne.
Yeah.
And you know, I would not want to be where he is at all. It's not an easy place to be at this time of where we are with our social care and the state of the NHS in the care home. But we find some grace there because we're both, you know, we're both in it.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary Burnett Brown.
Hi, Lucy. Hi, Carly.
Hi, Mary.
Hi there. I took Carly's course, the Descent and Rising course, when she launched your book, and it was a wonderful course.
Thank you.
And when I was taking the course, you know, you would always reference the sky gods. And I started using that term of the sky gods. And can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to talk about the sky gods in your book? Like, what brought that up for you to write about that?
I just feel like the idea of knocking on the door of the wrong god is prevalent in so many of our lives, particularly living in a patriarchal culture where, because of the structures being the way they are, we often have to knock on sky gods. And actually, I'm thinking, Lucy, about your story of you saying, you know, it's the last place I wanted to go was to the sky gods. Yeah, I had to go to the sky gods because they are the gateway in this culture that we're living in. So I feel like sky god culture is the culture we live in. This citadel of the mind over the body, the masculine over the feminine, this elevated, low kind of culture. And so it just felt like such an important piece of the myth. Have the sky gods sort of there as to have that named just feels so poignant. But I think what's also really poignant to me is the absence of female elders in the myth. And some writers say that that's because Sumerian culture was in transition to patriarchy and that it was some sort of comment on the fact that the mother figure was no longer already, it was already that the sky gods were who you went to rather than a mother goddess figure. And I find that really fascinating. And yeah, just wonder about how we reinstate that goddess aspect. And I think that's very much about what the myth is about in many ways, is coming back into our erotic intelligence over our rational, separated cult of the father intelligence somehow.
Oh, yeah. And you thank you. When I took your course, you really helped me get into my body.
Right.
With the somatic practices that we went through in your course, you know, about, you know, moving your face.
Yeah.
And just, you know, I'm practicing that, and it's just like as the divine feminine, you know, all the energies are in our body. And when you like let it out, let the fire out, right? It's okay, that is so healing for all of the women, that we can just let our emotions out, you know. And you really brought me there. Thank you when I took your course.
Oh, it was such a pleasure to have you part of the circle. And yeah, I really I'm always in my sessions, I'm a big fan of disrupting the politenesses of the face, because I think we are often encouraged to do the shakeout through the body, but we don't kind of disrupt these habits of polite face. And the nervous system is so programmed and connected to our facial expressions. So yeah, I love that you loved that bit, and I love that bit too. I love making really gargoyle-ish faces whenever possible.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you.
Stephanie, you were up next.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I'm coming into you from Bordeaux, France.
Oh,
And
lovely.
yeah, so I'm only at chapter, I'm about to start the Heart Gate.
Mm.
So I definitely am not, I haven't finished the book, but it is, yeah, like it just resonates on so many different levels. I'm clearly in the descent, and realize actually just from what little I've read that I perhaps started the descent as an infant. I feel like I've been in the descent for many years. And I'm doing trauma therapy. A lot is going on. I'm in the middle of a major breakup, separation. It's sorry, I'm hoping you can hear me okay still. Am I coming in okay?
Yep.
Thank you on your audio.
Yeah. And I'm just hearing some interference. I don't know what that is, but I guess to be succinct, well, yeah, and just a big thank you. And I think I wrote you an email, like all my authors, spiritual teachers, poets, like everything's coming together in this book. It's crazy, like different people I have followed and read, and this myth is sort of crystallizing things and making the descent more clear. But I guess the question I have is, it almost makes me feel more lonely. Like now I have this language, like now I have this map that ties all these pieces together. And, it's like I'm going somewhere. I'm in the dark. I'm going there. And but, I can't really talk about this with most people. Like my beloved therapist that I'm doing all the trauma work with, she's not reading the book, like, I love having this book, and I love having this language, and I love this just complete switch of the paradigm of, instead of ascending, we're descending. But it's so not part of the outside world. It's so not part of our culture, or even in the language of, healing and self-help. And it's like, if you're, it's how do you take this journey of the descent and kind of still be part of the the real world, and maintain relationships. Yeah, like I guess that's what it is. Like I love so much about this, the poetry, the everything, and yet it makes me feel a little bit more alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do speak to this a little bit later in the book, but it's this sense of the world hasn't changed, but I have, and all of a sudden I'm not swimming in the mainstream anymore. And there can be a real sense of exile again in that, and loneliness. Like you said, I felt a lot of loneliness. And I find it really interesting that a lot of women who are really drawn to this myth are also space holders, because I think that what it does is makes us want to create communities that do speak this language, even if they're not based on the Inanna myth, that there's some sort of common language that we sort of want to attract. And so I just wonder, over time, maybe that will start to happen for you. It does seem to happen. And there is an undeniable loneliness in that waking up of the descent. I think it is part of it. I still feel it sometimes. I think it is quite lonely. And I think it really does bring into view this loss of community that we've experienced living in the domination systems that we live in. Even if we have pockets of community, that true community is not really the truth of dominator culture. And so that is a massive loss, and it's a grief, and it's a grief that I feel all the time. And I think it's a grief women bump into in menopause, when they become mothers, if they have relationship breakdowns, if you go through a breakdown, because again, who holds it? And yes, you have it with a therapist, but a therapist isn't a community. So it's a big question, and I think that you're feeling it, and I think in a way maybe that we have to feel it in order to catalyze change, which is why I feel like a descent is personal work and collective work simultaneously. So I'm with you. I don't think there's any way to avoid that feeling, and I feel like perhaps there's a purpose to the feeling as well. Maybe that's what I imagine, and what I found in my own life to be true. So
thank you, and thank you, Stephanie. I'm mindful that we're reaching the hour and we've got 3 more questions. So Fenella, you're next. And if we can keep the questions short so that we can get through all 3 of them, that would be great.
Yeah, of course. Carly, thank you so much. This book is something. It's quite something. My question is that I love that poetry was brought in. I love that you read some poetry. I feel like the poetry of this book are different to the poetry and interact with and the poetry that I'm kind of surrounded by. And I wondered, you know, how you went about finding these poems. Like, did you have them already? Did they kind of come into your space as you were writing? What was the kind of journey of bringing the incredible poetry into this book?
So I had never worked with poems in my entire life until I met my therapist, John Hillman, who works with poems. And so as part of our therapy sessions, he was very, very intuitive at choosing a poem either midway through the session, some point in the session, and speaking it to me. And often the poems would just touch a part of me that had never been spoken to. And I found it was life-changing. And so then that was through my descent that he was like my Enki in the descent and rising. So the poems that are in the book are a lot of the ones that I worked with through that time. And there are more that I've worked with as well that I couldn't include. In fact, the poetry was one of the things that we had to take a lot of it out, but the ones that we kept, I'm really grateful for. So yeah, I'm glad that that spoke to you. And yeah, soulful poetry, I just think is such medicine in descent and rising. So yeah, thank you for bringing that thread. It's one that's very, very dear to me.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Fenella. Thanks, Carly. Judith.
Thank you very much. I am older, obviously, and in January was the first time I was introduced to Womancraft or Descent and Rising or any kind of literature along this line from a woman who's younger than I am. And I was blown open and realized what has happened in my life for God knows how many years. I feel behind. I feel backwards. I have bought 15 books that are Womancraft in the last month. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm reading everybody everywhere, and I feel like I'm 12 and going in. Yeah, I do. And I'm calling my friend up who works for a major hospital in the state that she's in, and she's driving in an hour and a half home. I'm on the West Coast of the United States, and I'm saying, la, 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 la. And she's saying, stop, it comes when it comes. But I want to play catch up. I want to understand. I've had a lot of therapy for trauma from a really good trauma therapist, not just a therapist who thinks they're treating trauma. This is an individual that's highly regarded in the trauma therapy community. And she's now reading your book. Where do I go from here? Because I find myself going, you should have known this. And then I realized I never even knew. I never even heard of Iana. I had no idea of. I feel you. Did you ever go to school? Did you? And then at the same, I'm older. I'm asking younger people questions. I'm trying to get everything I can all at once. Where do I go from here? End of question. Because I know I'm really all over the place right now.
Yeah. And it's amazing, isn't it? Because I think that voice of I should have known is so much the critical inner masculine voice, which is part of the descent, is actually possibly feeling the grief of the fact that we didn't have it, right? I felt that too when I discovered this, like, why didn't anyone tell me? Why am I having to learn this in my 30s? What's, you know, and obviously that's a lot younger, but whenever it happens, I think that the grief is part of the process of feeling the loss of the fact we haven't had this lineage, we haven't had these stories, and allowing that, like that voice of you should have known, did you ever go to school, in a way, I think is a protector against the grieving process in a way. And so just to, if I could offer you anything, I would just say, just try to be so compassionate to yourself. And I love the passion bubbling up. And I think that that thread will guide you to the next step, because it's clearly just really touched something. Something's woken up that's gone hungry for this, you know, and that hunger, I think, is the thing that leads us forward. So I just trust that the aliveness you're speaking from, and the grief that you're speaking from, and all of the pieces that are moving at the moment will reveal the wisdom that's in you, that's brought you here. I wish you could just let me know what happens. Because yeah, it sounds really exciting, as well as also I can hear quite disruptive and difficult aspects too. So yeah, thank you.
Thank
And I
you
would
very much.
I would just add to that this is going to sound like me being a professional book pusher, which I am, but my feeling is that, because I have regrets too about all the things that I didn't do right, or because I didn't know stuff and I hadn't healed stuff, but I really think that what we have is now, and that when the information comes to us, we can be conduits of it. We can help move it out into the world. We can help introduce it to other people. And we make sure that it doesn't stop with us, because many people will learn something and then it stops with them. Whereas if you help it to get out into your circles, out into your community, you're making sure that lots of people do get this information earlier. They do learn it earlier. It becomes part of their story earlier, and it becomes known, so that nobody has to have that feeling of, why didn't I know? Because finding it is hard, but when you found it, you can be one of the disseminators of it.
I am very vocal about things. And
Yay!
the idea that there was this huge blank, and I stopped and went, I don't know any stories about women. We are out of history. I didn't even thought of that. We're not there. Where are we? We had to have been here. And I am grateful to Carly for reminding me that I've got to stop the patriarchal negation of my own value and worth, and the fact that my friend Mary Jo was right. She said, it comes when it comes. And did you know this? And did you know that? Tomorrow I will be going to a local bookstore that features books similar to in nature. And I'm going to bring books with me and say, why not? Where are they? They should have been here. Why aren't they here? And
Thank
why
you,
don't we have
Judith.
it?
Thank you so much.
We need all the authors. Yes, really. Thank you all. And excuse me for being so verbal.
Oh,
I'm delighted, and I'm delighted you found us and that you are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sophia.
I know we're going over time. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yep.
So Lucy, just like you, I discovered the Inanna myth through Pam England when I was becoming a mother and working as a doula. And now I've reconnected with the Inanna myth in my menopause journey, as you know, Carly. I don't know if I can articulate this as a question, or it's more like a reflection. I just have the feeling that working with the myth, it just activates within me the whole journey into the underworld in such a powerful way. And my sense is that it's just constantly taking me to deeper and deeper levels. And I feel like the figure of Ninshaba is, maybe because she's somehow stronger in me, then it means that I can access deeper places. And if that's your experience, it also, it's like, can be overwhelming. Like in the last months, it's like really nuclear, painful, old, even like generational pain of my family. It's like, wow, I kind of, sometimes it's like, it feels there's more and more levels of birthing and disintegrating and seeing these layers and layers of patriarchy in me. And is there something you can reflect about that, holding ourselves in that diving deeper and deeper and deeper?
Well, I just want to reflect back what you've just said. You know, that it's almost like the stronger Ninshaba is in me,
Yeah.
the more I'm able to witness, and perhaps the more you're able to open again to the next layer and the next widening of your capacity to be with this stuff. And I feel like, you know, it's also, I know that you're a space holder and that you space hold anonymous for women moving through this rite of passage. And so I also feel like as a space holder, or if we start to write about something, we have to go through, as Lucy was saying earlier, we have to go through the process again to keep widening out. And the dark is so vast, isn't it? It's infinitely vast. So we're never going to reach the sides of that. And there's something for me that's really painful about that and really exciting about that as well, in the sense of we're never done, no matter what age we are, no matter how much work we've done inside of this. And I personally try to see it as a symbol of the way that I am robust enough to take the next bit and be able to learn the next bit, particularly if I'm holding space for others, that I can deliver something, I can be with them, I can be with more people inside of it. So I don't know if there's anything in that for you, but that's what comes in this moment. And yeah, you know, the work you're doing is so wonderful for the women. So the work you're doing in yourself, I'm sure, will be such a gift to them as well as to you as well.
Thank you, Sophia. We have reached the end, Carly, but I would love to finish it with, do you have a couple of lines of something that you would like to read, another poem that you'd like to share, something that feels like it needs completion or needs to be shared with us?
Do you know, it feels quite complete. I think perhaps I'll just read maybe I don't want to read the last paragraph actually, because I feel like it's nice that if anyone hasn't got that far yet, to leave that for them. I just want to offer so much gratitude for you, Lucy, and this community of women that we co-create together, because I just feel that that's been one of the biggest gifts of this book, has been that it's plugged me into an even wider, ever-growing network of other people doing this kind of work, walking these paths, who are really willing to go there. And that brings me so much heart at this incredibly, it's like the best and worst of times to be alive or something like that. So I just feel like, thank you for showing up and being here. And I'm just utterly grateful. And that, I think that's the last thing I have to say.
Wonderful. Well, if you'd like to work with Carly, Carly is going to be at the Witches Revival in Lancaster, along with myself, the 9th to the 12th, I think it is, of August. We'll also have with us a new Womancraft author, Coco Sienna Ray, who is also writing on a very similar topic. Her book is called, I'm literally editing it at the moment, and it'll be out next February, and it's called Digging for Mother's Bones, and it's about that digging deep into our maternal lineage, into ourselves as mothers, and reconnecting with the mother, with the sacred feminine. So it's deep, dark, dirty, powerful, important, scary, hard, incredible, empowering stuff. So she will also be there. So the three of us will be there. We'll have the Womancraft stall, and we will each be teaching or speaking one of the days. So do come and join us there. Our next book club is Amantha Murphy, The Way of the Shavan, finding spiritual connection from our ancient roots. So this is all about shamanism and Ireland and Irish thought and women. And that is May the 9th. And my book, Crow Moon, has just launched on the 1st of March. So if you haven't, do check it out. And if you go to my website, lucyhpierce, Pierce with a C.com, There's a couple of weeks left to access my Wild Initiations conversation series, which has been having so much incredible feedback. I've just been blown away by the emails and the comments that I've been receiving. I'm in conversation with 8 different heroines of mine. We dive deep into all things magic, wise, initiation. So you can access the entire series. It's entirely free. You just pop in your email and we send them along to you. And because they've been so successful, there is an upcoming podcast. So I'm starting my podcast after years of threatening it. So that will probably be launching in April. And it's called Creative Magic, and I'm really excited. So I think that's all. Come to Lancaster, come and see Carly and I and hang out with us and hug us and buy our books and generally have a wonderful time there. Carly, thank you. Please go enjoy your husband and enjoy your time away. And thank you all for being with us.
Thanks, Lucy. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.